Thank you, candidates. My final question concerns the topic of Texas sovereignty. I think we'd all admit to occasionally indulging the fantasy of just quitting Washington, D.C., just opting out. But we also feel a lot of justifiable pride as Americans. We don't want to secede. The 10th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution says the powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively, or to the people. Last year, the Texas legislature passed a resolution, HCR 50, affirming Texas sovereignty under the 10th Amendment and demanding that the federal government, quote, cease and desist, effective immediately, mandates that are beyond the scope of these constitutionally delegated powers. As governor, what specific area or program or department will you fight the hardest to keep Congress out of? And how will you respond if Congress responds with effectively, yeah or what? For this question, we start with Mr. Tidwell.
There is no single program, department, or anything that I would work with. You have to do it as a whole. And to me, a resolution, as in HCR 50, is a cop-out. So we made a resolution. I mean, what effect did it have at the federal government level? It's the same as Governor Perry saying, we're not going to take your stimulus money, but then sitting by as the legislature voted to take it. It carries no weight. One of the things I already want to push for is the repeal of the 17th Amendment. I want our U.S. senators to represent our state. We need to go back to having them appointed by the state legislature and not elected by popular vote. That is why we have a House of Representatives. Second, as the most visible person in the state, I would use my position to be more vocal on constitutional issues. If the Texas people do not approve of what the federal government is doing, I will campaign against the federal government. I would work with governors in other states to strengthen our position. If public opposition and persuasion are not enough, then more drastic measures would have to be taken. I would work with the legislature and the Attorney General to preserve any and all legal action I can take. Nullification is an option that has been mentioned but has never truly been used. Personally, I would do everything in my power to make it difficult for the federal government to access monies from the citizens and businesses in Texas. I would refuse all of their money and try to keep all of our money to ourselves. And fortunately, if all else fails, it is our right, our duty, to throw off such government and to provide for new guards for our future security. Thank you.
Basically, you have to understand that the federal government asks the state of Texas to collect funds for it, and we pass those on to them. The question is, why does the federal government ask us to do that? So they can have strings attached. What happens is that when they pass the money back down to the states, they then can dictate as to how the money has to be spent, maybe directly or indirectly. For example, it might be a welfare program as to what income level or benefits provided, what age groups. Maybe it has to do with education. The strings are attached. It's called maintenance of effort. Is it basically once the federal government gives you money, it's MOE, maintenance of effort. So therefore it means they put the money in your hands that was already yours. And now you have to continue on with their vision, not the state's vision. So we have to stop this process. We have to stop it at the state level. I would, as governor, try to restrict as many of the funds that we send to the federal government as possible so this is not a problem. If we get the federal government out of the state's business, we can then move forward. For example, we did not take this, but here's how it would work. During the stimulus plan, there was $555 million the state of Texas could have used for its unemployment fund, which is bust. We're broke. The state of Texas declined that because it was going to require us to expand benefits and expand the people who are eligible for the program. It would have cost the state of Texas perpetually $77 million per year for the rest of the program's life. So our unemployment program would be affected by $77 million per year in today's dollars. So basically, in 7 years, that $555 million is ate up. And the state of Texas then has a liability that it didn't have before. So the federal government has to be out of our business from the very beginning. We need to quit sending money to Washington and asking for them to give it back with strings. We no longer need the maintenance of effort in our state. Thank you.
Let there be no mistake. Decisions that the next governor makes and steps that the next governor takes regarding this issue will have profound consequences. Those decisions and those steps must be weighed very carefully beforehand. To think otherwise is naive, and to claim otherwise is disingenuous and, quite frankly, irresponsible. That said, when I, as a young adult, became a Texan, my first loyalty became to Texas. Our Constitution clearly states the perpetuity of the Union depends upon the preservation of the right of self-government. Without respect for state sovereignty, the Union, as envisioned by the founders, would no longer exist. As governor, I would first work with our delegation in Washington to require respect for the 10th Amendment. I would work with the Texas Attorney General to challenge in court federal abridgments of the 10th Amendment. I would reject federal funding for the state and work to end acceptance of federal funding by the local governments. I would withhold the cooperation of the federal government with federal statutes, cooperation of the state government with federal statutes, regulations, and acts which infringe on Texas sovereignty. I would work with the Texas Attorney General and the legislature, as well as governors in our sister states, to present a united front should it become necessary to assert nullification and interposition. There has been talk recently of secession, and such is our right, both in natural law and under the 10th Amendment. But again, any such steps will have profound consequences, and we owe it to ourselves, and we owe it to our children to recognize that. This is not the time, and this is not the subject for demagoguery and pomposity. The best plan, the best thing that we can do, is to ensure that Texas sovereignty is respected by first convincing the people of Texas to demand that it be respected, and then ensuring that Washington respects it. If that fails, then the people of Texas, the general population, the general electorate, not just our elected officials, must decide our next course of action. Thank you.
Well, this is my key issue, Texas sovereignty and the 10th Amendment. Yes, for one example of what we can do, I'll choose this, the EPA. The EPA makes these ridiculous regulations like carbon dioxide is a pollutant. But the EPA has no teeth, it has no enforcement mechanism. How do they enforce such a thing? Well, they make the states do it. They don't pay us anything for it. We have the Texas Air Quality Control Board, and they have to go around and administer the EPA regulations. Why don't they just stop? Don't do it. There's a case called Massachusetts versus EPA several years ago that said, upheld the regulation that carbon dioxide is a pollutant. I said, how can this happen? That's just non-intelligent. Well, I read it, and it was just a dive. Nobody challenged the science. Well, we have all these rules and law that say no junk science, you have to have a gatekeeper for scientific reliability. They didn't do any of that. They just folded like a cheap tin. Today, our Attorney General, Greg Abbott, filed a suit to try to get that reopened, and that's fine, but where were you when all this was happening? Just asleep at the wheel, I guess. But I've read the Sheriff Matt Prince case on the Brady Bill, and there he challenged the Brady Bill, went to the Supreme Court, and I said, you don't have to do this. If the federal government passes a law and expects you to administer it, you don't have to do that. The Sheriff Matt says he would do it different if he had the chance. He would just not do it. It's better to ask forgiveness than to seek permission. And so that's why I say just stop doing these things. Stop filing suits against citizens and businesses in Texas and making them get permits. Just say no, you don't have to do that. Federal government, you got a rule, you got a law, you want to enforce it, that's up to you. But you're not going to use Texas.